Hello, everyone. I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, Common Core is a concept that is causing uncommon controversy as the legislature considers the direction of education. We'll look tonight at the latest from the lawmakers, including a new plan for the convention center and fighting the flood protection lawsuit. We'll also examine competition between private and public schools. Our Future Watch segment looks at the future of the former Holy Cross High School site and why Forbes Magazine ranks New Orleans high in brainpower. On the books for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. From Baton Rouge, John Maginnis, publisher, La Politics Weekly. Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter, and Danielle Dreilinger, reporter, NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune. First, over to John, and we're going to talk about our convention center. There's a deal in the works again that sort of resurrected.
There was a plan last year, and both the governor and the convention center board fought over money, and they both lost. This year, they're trying to work together. The governor wants to take about $75 million from the convention center revenues to balance the budget. And the board is kind of going along with that as long as the governor is helping them with a plan that would allow them to exceed their bonding capacity to partner with private industry to develop on the upriver side of the convention center a new hotel, condos, and retail. They tried this last year, and the governor vetoed it.
The Motel Association fought it vehemently too, didn't they?
They didn't, yeah, right. But they fought the casino. And so what this plan leaves out is doesn't touch the World Trade Center site, which spurred a lot of controversy last year. It's just going to be upriver. So these two sides are working together now, and Representative Walt Leger, the Speaker Pro Tem, is kind of in the middle of it. And if it all works out, it could be where the governor gets the cash he needs to balance this year's budget, and the hospitality tourism industry gets the expansion to the convention center targeted that they believe they would really help with their future.
Well, what makes the landscape this year more favorable for it, perhaps proceeding?
Last year the New Orleans delegation fought hard against the governor taking money out of the convention center. And then the governor, maybe in response, vetoed the bill for the convention center to develop their property along with the World Trade Center site. So this year they decided, okay, let's try and work together instead of against each other, and they both have scaled back what they want. The governor's just trying to get $50 million instead of $100 million, and the convention center is just taking upriver and not going and dealing with the World Trade Center site. So I think there's a possibility they both could work it out.
Okay, you talk about hotels and retail. Is there a feeling that there needs to be more display space, or is that pretty much maxed out right now?
Display space for the convention center? Well, I think what they feel they're looking for a new hotel, which they don't have attached to their site, and they're talking about condos, which they've never done before, which they think could be a good cash generator, and retail space. So it's kind of different. Instead of just adding more meeting rooms to the convention center, they're going in a different direction of generating more cash.
It probably has all the meeting rooms it needs. I mean, it's a big facility.
Right. What they need, they feel they need a hotel. They need a hotel attached to the amenities.
I live 2.5 blocks from the convention center, and people, especially older people or people in the heat of the summer, it's a far walk to get food sometimes and get back to a hotel. I mean, they always have buses, but there's nothing that's through air-conditioned space and super close. There's not a whole lot.
I'm not sure how many cheap groceries will be at this new place, but still there will be amenities, and maybe go along with the Riverwalk, which is about to open.
Does the Hotel Motel Association still object to this hotel? You said that last year they objected to it?
I think they objected to the revenue source that would fund it, because they don't have access to it.
I think they're trying to work that out and bring them all into the fold.
But you still have an active port as you go upriver. You still have Mardi Gras World, so there's a lot of activity that's developing in that area.
Well, there's always been like I said, the convention center needs to not just expand in space, but they need to expand in amenities, and they feel a hotel is a real priority, and condos and retail would generate more cash to pay off the bonds make it all work.
This needs to go through the legislature.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
And so, what's the status of it right now?
Well,
Where is it?
it's all, it's just in the starting phases. They're just talking about it. They're going to have to get, the state's going to have to put up cash for the capital outlay, and a big deal. And most of the money is going to come from private investment, but the state's got to put up about 10, 15, 20% to make it all work. So we'll see in a 6 weeks or so how it all works out.
Yep, things are just really beginning to rock and roll at the legislature, so we'll definitely be following that. And speaking of rock and rolling at the legislature, Common Core was up for debate in a House committee. So why don't you tell us what happened with that, Danielle? And then also we're going to want you to explain to us what is Common Core and what's causing the controversy.
Right. So at the legislature this week, it was the House Education Committee, and they were hearing only 2 of several bills about the standards. So one would have pulled the state out of the Common Core academic standards, and the other would have pulled the state out of the test that the state is planning to use for the new standards. I'll explain what those are in a moment. And after hours and hours and hours of testimony, they voted against both bills 12-7. And one of the big question marks was what Governor Jindal was going to do, and he at the very end put in cards, his staff put in cards indicating that he supported both of these bills to pull the state out of standards that he had signed on to back in 2010. But he wouldn't say anything about it. He was out of town. So it seems to indicate, that the people who are opposed to Common Core are going to be continuing to fight to repeal it, despite losing these bills this week.
And it went down 12-7.
12-7, both of them.
Right. And when you say putting cards, what does that mean exactly?
So you put in cards to show whether you're supporting a bill or you're opposing it, and then if you want to speak. So Jindal wasn't in town, but this was the clearest sign so far. He's been wavering on his support for these standards for months because it's been such a huge national political controversy. He seems to think that he can't be seen as being in favor of the standards. So this is the most definitive sign we've seen that he's going the other way.
Right, and I think it's like he's trying to cover his bases. He is trying to appeal to the conservatives who think that Common Core is some communist plot to take over education. At the same time, he's
not quoted on the matter at all.
Right. He didn't go full bore against it and lobby it the way he did for his education agenda 2 years ago. So that was the indication to the legislature. They can do what they want. The Education Committee, a majority of Republicans, voted against the bill. Almost all the Democrats did. I think it's dead for the session.
Which means Common Core stays.
Right. Common Core stays. The real opposition to it came in this area, St. Tammany and Jefferson Parish. You get outside of that, most people thought, and the business community came out hard in favor of Common Core.
And so Common Core stays, but Common Core has been in effect. Tell us what Common Core is.
So, and I'm really happy to have a chance to talk about this because a study came out from LSU this week that showed that half the respondents, had heard of Common Core, but they didn't know what it actually is. So it's a set of academic standards. So what these do is they just lay out what students are supposed to be able to do at the end of each grade in math and in English. So it's only 2 subjects. So things like, should they be able to calculate the volume of a sphere, something like that. And it's a big difference from the standards that are in place now that were developed by Louisiana.
Called grade level expectations.
Grade level expectations.
So it's replacing GLEs.
It replaces GLEs. And this was it was a shared effort across originally 45 states and DC, and now it's 44 states. But it was encouraged by the federal government. There's some federal funding that goes with it, but it was developed by governors, including Louisiana. So
is it a federal curriculum?
It's not a federal curriculum. And in fact, one of the funny points of dissension in the strange bedfellows who oppose Common Core, you have people who are more conservative who think that this is too much federal control in education. But then you have people from the teachers' unions who say, we weren't given enough guidance. We want you to give us a curriculum. Why didn't the state give us a curriculum? So no, it's not federalized curriculum or anything like that, though that is the buzzword against it.
There is some other legislation, though, that is in the legislature that's been filed, right, regarding Common Core? Is there more going to come up?
There's a bunch of other bills, but I thought this vote was definitive. It says the legislature really doesn't want to go against the business community. They don't want to take a step back from what seems to have been a path to progress. And the idea is that, The state on its own is going to develop its own. We're going to make our better standards than the rest of the country when we're number 48. And that I think was a decisive factor, and just just the support from the business community and the education leaders, the governor's own superintendent, the chairman of the board of the secondary education, the legislature, and they saw the governor put a little card in, and they said,
let me quickly note also, Danielle, in your coverage and online, you had a test that people could take over the past week and a half. There were 10 questions. Just really quickly, if you could tell us what kind of response have you been getting to that?
We've been getting a really huge response. So these standards are already being taught in Louisiana, and kids are being tested on them next week. So we have sample questions from new tests to show people what the differences are, what these questions look like. We've had experts coming in to explain how they're different, because they're supposed to promote critical thinking. They're supposed to make students read more and think more about how to solve the problems.
We have to wrap this discussion up, but you can go to NOLA.com and you can take that test. And
please do. Final
answer. You can test as good as a 5th or 6th grader or a 7th grader.
Or Pierre the Pelican.
if you have the brain power, and talking about brain power, Errol, New Orleans is up there tying with San Antonio, according to Forbes, as having the greatest increase in brain power over these past few years.
All lives in New Orleans, we've been told that we're lovable but not well educated. It turns out we are well educated and I hope still lovable. What happened, this is a study in Forbes, and Forbes does a lot of these ranking sort of things, and these things are a bit subjective, but there's still some trends that you can learn from this. And what this is was a study of where college-educated people have been moving around the country. And they've found that a lot of college education, this was between 2007 and 2012, a lot of them have been moving to the south and to what they call the Intermountain West, mainly away from California and into that. And of those areas, New Orleans has just had a huge growth. That New Orleans has had twice the rate as the rest of the nation during this period of time. Between that time, 41,000 people, 41,000 new college-educated people living in the New Orleans area, which is tied with San Antonio. And one of the reasons that they think, and the author says, some people will say, well, it's because of Katrina that we lost people, so some people coming back. But he says other people are saying that this is actually more than that, because there are corresponding industries that are developing, General Electric and a gaming industry. So there are new industries that are starting that are going after these people. And so people aren't seeing this as much as a flash in the pan because of Katrina, but actually a real growth of people that are coming. I see it standing on the street corner. Actually, I mean, you see this, the 40-year-olds who have moved into the community, who want to do things, and they're entrepreneurs, and they make a great analogy. They talk about they interview someone who's living in New Orleans, and he says, for $65,000 a year, if I was in San Francisco, I could share an apartment, and I couldn't have an automobile. He says, in New Orleans, I could have a nice place to live, I could have an automobile, I could eat at the finest restaurants and go into nightclubs. And so it is a whole lot less expensive to live here than other places, and also the amenities that New Orleans has too. And so looking at that, I mean, it's very encouraging. I've even heard like the NBA, the Pelicans, that part of what they're looking at in terms of their growth is that crowd, because that crowd has come from other places where they've seen NBA basketball and they're used to it, and and they're going to have money and they're going to be able to go to the games. And so they had the list of the top towns. New Orleans tied with San Antonio, which is big on, and it's mostly southern towns. Texas does really well. Texas.
Yeah, what 4 towns?
Houston, Austin, San Antonio.
Houston.
Right, and so
it's certainly great news for New Orleans to be topping a list like this.
It says as much about real estate as anything. People moving away from the West Coast and the East Coast and coming to other cities that are offering these amenities and bolstering the economy.
And wonderful neighborhoods and just much affordable living and good food. And
not to mention, I can attest to
that. I would say, Danielle, I guess you're an example of this.
I am absolutely an example, right, because I lived in Boston and it was a fortune. And a lot of people, a lot of my friends in their 20s and 30s are leaving because you just don't see how you can continue to live there.
Yeah. So are you enjoying it here?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Well, welcome.
And they even mentioned like towns like Boston and San Francisco and Los Angeles, which have always had a very high level of educated people, that those people aren't able to live there anymore. It's become too expensive, and so they're moving to other places.
We have to move on right now to Dawn and to the Holy Cross neighborhood, to the Holy Cross site, and what's planned for that, which has generated some controversy.
Holy Cross, it is a neighborhood. The lower Ninth Ward is really kind of divided into two neighborhoods, one known as Holy Cross and the other known simply as the lower Ninth Ward. The Holy Cross site was purchased from Holy Cross School by Perez Architects after it sat vacant after Hurricane Katrina. And Perez Architects have been working on plans for the past couple of years. Many neighbors have fought their plans and said they're too dense, we don't want something so high. Their plans, we have some artist renderings, sketches of what they want to do on the site. They want to preserve the 1895 administration building that is still there and get that back up and running. They have a couple of buildings that they call mid-rise buildings that will have apartment units in them, mostly one bedroom, some two bedroom, some townhouse development, as well as commercial settings, a coffee shop. In the administration building, they have plans for a culinary school and a karate school. So you can see, and a lot of the neighborhood concerns is that there's not enough green space and that it's too dense. They say, we have a ½ acre dedicated to a park, and we can't build just a whole park on the site. You can, as they get closer to the river, the height gets a little bit higher. You can see those two buildings on the left side. That's an artist rendering of the mid-rise buildings that would be out over the river.
And that would be housing?
That would be housing.
Okay.
1- and 2-bedroom apartments. It has gone before the Historic Districts Landmark Commission and the PRC. They need a zoning change for the height and also the commercial aspect of it. Both the PRC and the HDLC kind of, I don't want to say pass the buck. I didn't sit in on any of those meetings, but they passed it on to the City Council without making any recommendations at all. The City Council meets next Thursday, April the 10th, and this issue is on the agenda. Of course, it could get deferred, it could get extended. They could get a vote on it. They are hoping to get a vote on it and that it would go forward. And the next, it doesn't mean that project is a done deal yet. They still have to go before Architectural Review Committee and through a permitting process. There are neighbors who are on board and say, we need the development, we need something to be a catalyst in the lower Ninth Ward where there are more vacant lots, almost as many vacant lots as there were pre-Katrina. There are other neighbors who say this is not what we want. We want more green space. We want more single family and maybe 2-family homes, not big buildings. We'll see where the dust settles after the council meeting on Thursday. Perez says, we've committed, their offices are going to move there from their French Quarter site. They're going to move their offices to the top floor of that administration building. They also say it would be irresponsible to purchase the land without designing a plan to pay back that purchase price. They think their plan will add families and jobs and activities to an area that desperately needs it. Some of the opponents say no.
So maybe this week the council
could
make a decision on this?
Could make a decision on this. But of course that's not the last stop, but the decision would be the zoning change that would allow the project to move forward to the next step.
There's always the old green space argument that green space just doesn't
green space, right, it doesn't pay bills and somebody has to maintain it, so it actually costs money. They say building a park as big as that site would cost, to maintain that park would cost more than the price of the site cost.
If we talk about these New Orleans, that's an area of growth in the future as you expand beyond Bywater and Marigny.
Right. Well, and I asked the lower 9 has had problems getting people to come in and buy up those vacant lots and take over houses, and some say, trying to go through the steps to get control of those vacant lots is hard, and people don't want to take that challenge on. And maybe if this is a completed site with buildings on it, it might spur the kind of growth.
So we should have an interesting council session coming up this Thursday.
Yes, on Thursday. Keep your eye on it.
Thanks a lot, Don. I'm going to go back over to Danielle, and you did a piece in February taking a look at enrollments for public and private schools. And we're seeing a drop in private school enrollment generally in the state and in the metro area. Is that correct?
Right, and this was really unexpected because Louisiana has been in the forefront of private school enrollment in the country. And the numbers get more significant the more you drill down. So at a statewide level, private school enrollment dropped 5% since 2002 to this current school year. Public school enrollment dropped 3%. But when you look more at that, what you see is that there was a huge drop in what you could call like conventional private schools. Like these are the big private schools, the ones that get certified for TOPS funding. There's been a big decrease there, and there's been growth in these small unregistered private schools as well as homeschooling, which is counted in the same category. And then when you look then in terms of greater New Orleans and also Baton Rouge, private school enrollment dropped twice as much as public. And then in most of the parishes in the region, since Katrina, everything dropped after Katrina, but public school enrollment has rebounded faster. And the big exception there is St. Tammany, actually, and that's also a surprise. Private school enrollment has really jumped in St. Tammany. It's a surprise because it's known for its public schools, and they take great pride in their public schools.
What are these smaller private schools that you're talking about? And these are ones that don't take state money?
Right. So the state has money for textbooks and for transportation, and you also have to get certified for top scholarships. And these schools, if you're not one of these, if you don't want that money, you don't have to go through any sort of process with the state, but you do have to sign up and just say, hi, we're a school, we exist. So the private schools that are registered with the state, they have to, for instance, be certified as being not racially discriminatory. And these private schools, very little is known about them. We went and tried to look at a few of them, and if I have my copious spare time, I'd love to look more into this. But there are thousands of them. The average enrollment is 4 kids.
Is how many?
4 children.
4?
It's very
And that's
puzzling.
considered a school?
What about the traditional private schools then?
So,
you know, Newman or Country Day or McGee or whatever, in Trinity in our area.
And generally, you know, the Archdiocesan Catholic schools, too. Those are
huge
considered
drop
private
in
schools.
Archdiocese schools, 25% since 2003.
And so this is where vouchers is something that these private schools are really supportive of because it helps them fill the gap.
Well, there's only 7,000 or 8,000 children's vouchers out there, so it only fills in to some degree.
But most of them are in New Orleans, so not most, but like still.
But I think you're right. These very small private schools, which are almost homeschooling, and then the homeschooling segment, which is getting bigger and bigger. So I think it's people who feel they can't afford the tuition of a private school, and they feel they can either a small school or homeschooling. You're seeing a lot more of that.
And then also, of course, the charter movement is really, you know, making public schools, much more attractive. Okay, well, thank you so much for that. That's a really good, interesting topic, too, to see, just seeing the shifting landscape of education, period, in our state.
It seems like it's getting more entrepreneurial.
It definitely does. Okay, talking about, you know, shifting landscapes and rocking times, it's the legislature. Let's go back to that. What's happening in the legislature just overall? I know we saw Austin Baton get really upset yesterday with what happened to his marijuana legislation.
He was trying to lessen the penalties for repeat offenders for marijuana possession. He thought he had the sheriffs neutral, at least, but then they came to the table and testified against his bill. He got all upset. The bill looks dead for the session. It would have cut in half the prison time for a second and third offense of marijuana possession. And the sheriff said, well, you know, I think we need to keep a closer look at Colorado and see what happens there before we take a stand on this. I don't know whether it was the sheriff's double-cross Austin Baton or he didn't communicate enough with the sheriffs, but it's a tall leap, I think, for the sheriffs to come out and start to be in favor of lessening any marijuana penalties, even though it, you know, a lot of people think it makes only total sense. You've been seeing conservative think tanks like Pelican Project think it's the right direction to be moving in. I don't think that the overall idea has been, maybe it's been sidetracked to a degree, but I think the idea out there is still supported, even within the governor's office. I think it kind of makes sense that maybe we should fall in line with what Mississippi's trying to do.
Is there time in the process for another bill to work
You know,
its way
that was
through?
a problem last year. You know, the bills got started too late and it didn't get through, but we still have 2/3 of the session to go. I think Senator Robert Adley has a bill in the Senate. Now, he's a little bit tougher character to deal with the sheriffs, and so maybe they still might get something through. But there's some real roadblocks in the legislature to get. This is something I thought would have been done 30 years ago, but here we are still arguing about it. But it still seems like Louisiana's on the cusp of doing something a little more progressive with sentencing for possession.
John, another issue is the effort to ward off the flood protection lawsuit. How's
yeah,
that
now that on that area, that's going full steam ahead. It seems like the efforts of which you thought the Green Army and General Honore were going to bring hordes of people to the Capitol, they haven't shown up yet. And whereas the oil industry, they're there. And those bills to derail, sidetrack, or nullify the lawsuits against the oil companies seem to be moving forward. And until I think citizens show up, I think they're going to pass. And
well, it passed. It went through the Senate committee
really
quickly. It just sailed through.
One bill's already through the Senate, and I don't see what's stopping it yet.
But this is always being presented in terms of the big industrialists and the citizens. A lot of the citizens have jobs for those oil companies, or
that's the key.
Are dependent on those companies.
That's the key. Even in South Louisiana, people who live near the coast, many of them make their living from the oil companies. Here in the New Orleans area, I think is the strongest support for those lawsuits. But you start going west across the river into coastal Louisiana, that's where people's jobs are. And then when you go north into Louisiana, if the governor says, let's do it, most legislators are saying, fine. So I have yet to see the critical mass show up. Even Common Core, I think, had more, firepower and individuals out there trying to derail that than I've seen attempt to try and block this effort to block the lawsuits.
All right, John, thanks a lot. Right now, we're gonna go over to Errol for our looking ahead.
Well, two things. Despite the bad weather, the azaleas are blooming around town. But the big thing is that there's a good possibility, we're talking about international flights last week, of British Airlines establishing a nonstop from New Orleans to London later in the year. Not sure if it's going to run every day, but it's in the works. They did it about a decade ago. It started in New Mexico. It started in Mexico City, came to New Orleans, was nonstop to London. Don't know if that's the same plan, but they are talking about trying to restore that flight.
Wonderful.
That'd be a big deal.
John?
I don't know if anyone here has ever been to Poverty Point in northeast Louisiana. It's an archaeological site of where early settlement. Well, it's trying to get on the World Heritage Sites list, and what's blocking it is that the United States is not paying its dues to UNESCO because it has admitted Palestine as a member. Well, Senator Mary Landrieu is trying to get the country, U.S., just to pay the dues so that Poverty Point might get considered as a World Heritage Site. There's only 21 in the country, like the Grand Canyon, the Statue of Liberty.
That would be wonderful.
And so, we'll see if the state can come up, or if the U.S. would come up with, I think, the 70 grand.
So we need to pay our dues. Okay, done.
There you go.
Errol talked about all the young, educated people moving here. If you don't want people here and you want to avoid crowds, it's time to move now, because WrestleMania is here this week. French Quarter Fest is next week. Jazz Fest is the 2 weeks after that. So get ready for a wild, crazy ride over the next 5 weeks.
Always something to do. Danielle.
I'm sorry, this is less fun than your other topics, but I'm interested in the Orleans Parish Superintendent search. This is the smaller of the two school systems in the city, but someday may have all the schools back again. They haven't had a permanent superintendent since June of 2012, and they've gone through some first interviews, and they're not having a lot of luck finding somebody they want.
And they've had people drop out. Thanks a lot, Danielle. Good having you here. Thanks to everybody for being here, and thank you for watching us, and we hope to see you again next week. For Informed Sources, have a good evening.